turns out. Okay, well thank you very much for that overwhelming introduction. I don't normally go that in depth, but anyway, I have written a number of books, and I have a few of them here that I still have copies of if anyone's interested. They're much discounted from normal. I do want to talk about my co-conspirators here today who helped me put this presentation together. Jack Koppel, I'm not sure if y'all know Jack or not, but he is the foremost cemetery historian here in Jefferson County. He's visited over 300 cemeteries here. He's constantly coming up with new cemeteries that he documents, and so there's a little history of Jack. And then Ellen White, she's also a cemetery historian, did a lot of the work on what you see here today. But neither of these folks like public speaking, and so they put me out here to do the talk on these. I am with the Louisville Historical League. We're on Facebook. Everyone's here on social media, right? I heard that talk about bullying on social media. And I tell you, social media is such a, wow. Yeah, it's something we, growing up, never had to deal with, and I'm glad we didn't, but all of our grandkids have to deal with it now. Our dues are very inexpensive if you're interested in joining the league. Here are some of our events. We do tours, we do talks, all sorts of things. We just had a event at the Peterson-Dumanel House. We have an event on April 23rd at Locust Grove. So we get out and do a lot of things. And so here we go, Cemeteries of St. Matthews. By the way, and this slide is out of order. It should have been above that title, but we are also offering a complimentary membership for those 30 and under. I don't think we have any 30 and unders here today, but if you have any students or grandkids, feel free to seek us out. It's complimentary. They get to attend all of our meetings, and we have a QR code. I'm not big on QR codes, but I understand that's what all the kids use nowadays, and so we have a QR code that goes to our website. So anyways, there are over 300 cemeteries in Jefferson County, as I previously mentioned. This is a map in 1858. It's called the Bergman map, and it's a great map. It's on the Library of Congress's website. If you go to loc.org and then put in 1858 Louisville, and this map will pop up, and it has some great detail, documents where people were living and all. And so if you're interested in knowing who owned your land before where you're at now, you can go on this map and find out. It's a great map. Here's some detail from that 1858 map, and I've circled some of the names that we'll be discussing here today, where their property once was. And here are some of the cemeteries we'll be looking at today, a little list of those. And that was in alphabetical order. We will not go alphabetically today. But we'll start with perhaps the most famous, Zachary Taylor family and the National Cemetery, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. They're off of Brownsboro Road near the Waterson Expressway. And there's old Zach's mausoleum there. And we've done some tours of the cemetery there, but and that's the family cemetery. Of course, his house was not very far from the cemetery here. And of course, all the rows of the soldiers there, they're buried at Zachary Taylor. By the way, we have a First Lady of the United States buried here. Who was the First Lady of the United States buried here in Louisville? What was her name? What was Zachary Taylor's wife's name? Come on, no?
Mrs. Taylor.
Mrs. Taylor. Her name was Margaret. Margaret Peggy Taylor is what she went by. So remember that. We have a First Lady buried here as well. Next, we'll go to another cemetery that you might have passed by on Browns Lane near, I think that's I-64 going past it there that I've highlighted. The Mallard Crossing apartments are just there up in the upper right-hand corner. It's part of Brown Park that's there. And it's all connected to this Brown, James Brown. As you can see, came from Delaware in the early 1800s. And house, and then when he died, his sons inherited the land, and then the house was bought by someone by the name of Monahan.
Right here.
Oh, are you connected to that?
You betcha.
Hot dog. Hey, how often does that happen that I have descendants here in the audience? Well, fantastic. So I did reference you there. So I take it you've been inside this house.
Absolutely.
Okay, good deal. Now, I don't know, I don't think the Monahans would be buried in Brown's Cemetery. I'm not sure where they would be
They
buried.
are not, no.
Which cemetery would they be in? Do you know? Are they in Cave Hill or?
Cave Hill.
Cave Hill. But anyways, so once James Brown passed away, his sons, Theodore and Arthur, inherited the land. And this is Theodore's house that was built. It's the old, well, I think it still exists, the Woodhaven Bed and Breakfast there off of, I think that's on Hubbard's Lane. Hubbard's changes into Brown's Lane there, but anyways.
That's also a part of the family.
That's correct. The Monahans probably owned that at one point. Here's more about the Brown Family Cemetery. You can Google this online if you're interested to know more about it. It talks to us about the Browns family, which I won't get into. But here's the cemetery itself. Kind of needs a little bit more maintenance there, as most of these cemeteries do. I do not know who actually maintains the cemetery. Most of these private cemeteries, these family cemeteries, have long since have been abandoned and are somewhat not maintained very well. Now this is James Graham Brown, who also owned this property, but he was not related to James Brown. He actually was born in Madison, Indiana, but he did own this area, and he had a farm there, and he stabled his horses at this location. But James Graham Brown, of course, the builder of the Brown Hotel. If you need to get some water, we can do that.
No, we got some water.
Okay, and then the Browns had a slave cemetery, and we were constantly looking for slave cemeteries. In fact, Jack Koppel emailed me earlier this week that he found 2 slave cemeteries somewhere here in Jefferson County, but we're always on the lookout for slave cemeteries, and there was one here for the Theodore Brown property. And so where you see that little yellow triangle is where the slave cemetery is.
Where is that?
We'll show you that. There's the, it's there, so it's behind, there's an apartment complex there. I do not know the name of the apartment complex. It says Cypress Point Apartments. So it's in the Cypress Point Apartments. And there's a little green area, and I'll come over and point it out. It looks like a little park area, but it's right here. Let me see if I have that. Yeah, I have it highlighted. And the only one, and there is the land right there that the slave cemetery is at. And the stones identify the grave sites. Unfortunately, slaves did not have headstones as we Europeans would have had, and they were just identified by stones. But this area was identified during the construction of these apartments and thus protected, so it was not built upon. But we're always looking, whenever we know of a development happening near a historic cemetery, we contact the contractors and make them on the lookout for slave cemeteries. Slaves were usually buried on the outskirts of the family cemetery, and we're always trying to find those. Kane Station, the Thompson Family Cemetery, they're off Brownsboro Road as well, right opposite Mockingbird Gardens. Some of you may be familiar with that. The Mesh Restaurant is right there in the lower right-hand corner. So if you're eating at Mesh, you can look out the window and see the cemetery. Here's a little information about it, about the Thompson family and their descendants. And the Thompsons also owned Salima Hall, which is there on Reedley Drive. In fact, this is almost right across the street from where I live. They're in Reedlawn. The Thompson family owned it from 1842 to 1880. So there is what the cemetery looks like. And most people can recognize this cemetery as they go along Brownsboro Road. I took this photograph from the 7th tee there at Crescent Hill Golf Course. There's the cemetery. Some of the headstones within the cemetery there.
Does somebody live there behind that?
Yeah, there are houses all the way around to this, apartments and all. So yes.
Dr. Ed Graves used to live there in
Mm.
that house.
Yeah, there's a tribute plaque there. And there's a little parking area. You can actually drive up the little lane there and park and go inside and see the cemetery if you're interested.
Who maintains it?
That I do not know. It's still a very active cemetery. I do not know who maintains it, but I'm sure the family, those family members, the descendants, more than likely do so. It's not a public cemetery.
The man who maintains our yard, he's young, he maintains that cemetery.
Okay,
He takes care of it.
great. It's well maintained, yes. There's a Mildred Thompson. She was the one that lived in Salima Hall. Okay, unnamed cemetery next to Oxmoor Toyota. So if you see with the little red star there, and I'm not sure if anyone here has Toyota automobiles, but if you go have them maintained at this facility, you can go out the back door there and look at this cemetery.
On what street?
This is off Shelbyville Road, right opposite Oxmoor Mall. So it's not actually in St. Matthews, just on the outskirts of St. Matthews. But here are some of the headstones. As you can tell, this one is not a very well maintained cemetery. In fact, we're not really certain whose this cemetery was. This is called the Roman Cemetery, John S. Roman Cemetery. You can see the little red dot there in the upper right-hand corner at 414 Wood Road. Yes, we have cemeteries in people's backyards. Many cemeteries in people's backyards here. Here are some of the headstones that we found in the Roman cemetery. Another unnamed cemetery, Oxmoor Lodge. This is off Christian Way there at Shelbyville Road. You can see Oxmoor Mall to the left there. Macy's department store overlooks this. And you can see it's a very well-defined cemetery. I don't think there's any headstones that are prominent here, but it is defined and thus protected.
Now, in these unnamed cemeteries or places like that, do you have any idea how many bodies there are in there?
No.
You don't know anything about
Do not know.
Okay.
And I'll discuss that here later in the presentation about similar topic. Okay, the Herr family. There's Herr family cemeteries everywhere, and this is one of them. It is there at 7211 Arrowwood Road. And this talks a little bit about the history of the Herr family, or Herr family, however you want to pronounce it. And it says it's maintained by the city of Greymore, Devondale. So it's actually maintained properly. This talks about who is buried there. A number of Herr families are there. I'll move on. Here are some of the... If you need me to go back, if you're still reading it, let me know. But I'll just move on to some of the headstones there. This is number 2. This is at 62112 Spring Lane. If I got that right, in the backyard of that house. And there was a Herr house that's still there, Herr house, however you want to pronounce it, built in 1825. It's 6212 Two Springs Lane, is what it says there.
Yeah, that's right off of Rudy Lane.
Yes. Yeah, Rudy Lane, correct. And we'll talk about the Rudys here later on.
That's not maintained very well.
Right. Number 3, there you can see the location at 730 Waterford Road. That's off Brownsboro Road.
Yeah.
You can see Rudy Lane there just off to the right. Talks about this. Let's see if there's anything in particular to point out. This one even has a, yeah, okay. So there's the cemetery in someone's backyard. How many people want a cemetery in your backyard?
Hey,
Yes, you got one?
well, I was the mailman on that route, and at Halloween, they decorate that
Oh,
up.
jeez.
They put a few extra headstones out there.
Oh, no. I'm sure the kids get a kick out of that.
Oh, yeah.
There's some of those headstones. Now these, and I'll talk about these a little bit later on, but these are not actual grave sites right here. These were relocated headstones from another graveyard, and I'll explain that shortly, but these were not actual graves. These were just the headstones, and I'll explain what happened a little bit later on with this. The Her Height Family Cemetery. So this is Westport Road, as you can see as it snakes around, and there's the Waterson Expressway interchange with Westport Road, and there's 4417 Westport Road. And I've actually been up within this estate that's here, but normally they have gates at the front and you cannot drive back in there. But anyways, the cemetery is up near the house. Talks about it. Talks about all the connections, all the genealogies of the Hare family. They were very prominent in this area. So it's very well maintained by the current owner of the home. Some of the names. Photograph of the cemetery to the house, to the main house. It kind of gives you a relationship. Okay, the Rudy Graveyard, of course, Rudy Lane. So the house itself, the Rudy house, which was called Rat Castle. Why, I don't know. Why you would call your house the Rat Castle? That would imply something, wouldn't it? But the house used to sit where the church one is now standing, and the spring house for the house is behind the church. It's still there. Talks about the Rudy and all. And so the Rudy Graveyard, it says, is located at 710 Victoria Place. I'm not familiar with that subdivision area, but it's there. Between Hubbard's Lane and Rudy Lane, it says. But the headstones are flat, and that's part of the problem we have with cemeteries, is that unfortunately a lot of times the headstones fall over and become flat, and then over time dirt grows over them and we lose those headstones. Those headstones are there, but they are below the surface. And Jack Koppel has a device that he probes the ground with to find these headstones. I've been with him in vacant cemeteries. They look like they're vacant, but he'll go around with this probe, find the headstones, we dig up the headstone, and we put it more on top of the ground. But that's unfortunately what happens to a lot of these cemeteries, is the headstones may be there, they're flat, and they get depressed below. And you can see some of them are beginning to do that right now. So there is another Rudy burial ground, it says. Some of the Rudy Holmes, it says, Eliza Hare Rudy. They lived there at the 308 Oat Farm Road, which is now 4319 Westbrook Road, if I get all that right. Some of this gets somewhat confusing. I've not actually been to these sites. So, as noted earlier, the headstone, you've seen this photograph just previously. These are not where they're actually buried. Unfortunately, when they widened Westport Road, they wiped out the cemetery. And they tried to move some of the bodies that they found, but they never find all the bodies. And so unfortunately, some of them are probably still buried under Westport Road. And there are still remnants of that cemetery in that location, as you can see, 4305 Westport Road. There are several fragments of headstones still remaining. And that's the good thing about Jack Koppel and Ellen White and people interested in cemeteries. Back in the, probably 50, 60, 70 years ago, contractors and officials weren't that interested in cemeteries. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of cemeteries just bulldozed over. And in fact, it's probably been 10, 15 years ago, but there was an article in the Courier Journal about a house construction in Jefferson County where they literally dug up a casket when they were digging the foundation for the basement of this house. But there was nothing that marked that cemetery. But now, through the efforts of Jack Koppel, Ellen White, numerous other folks, they've been going back through old records, old maps like the 1858 map, identifying where these cemeteries once were. They're going out there to those locations to see what's there and make sure it's identified. They contact the zoning officials, make sure they're on current maps of the area that a cemetery was there. I'll never forget, I was doing a project out in Spencer County a few years ago, and the farmer next door came over and said, "Hey, we think there's a cemetery on this land here that you're going to build this healthcare clinic." We're like going, "Whoa, no one told us about that." So I called my friend Jack Koppel. I said, "Jack, come out here. We're going to look around this property to see if we can find a cemetery." And we looked all over, we probed, we did various things, we could not find it. And we told the contractor, when you're digging, if you dig up anything, please let us know. But we never did locate anything. We just think the farmer just heard, a rumor, or, it had been passed down that there was a cemetery there, but it actually was not. But we do our due diligence as best possible to locate these cemeteries. Now this cemetery is very prominent, the Bullitt family cemetery. Hopefully everyone has seen this. It's there adjacent to Oxmoor Mall and Kohl's department store. If you go in the Kohl's department store, you should be able to see this cemetery. Now here's the genealogy of the Bullitt family. Thomas Bullitt actually was a surveyor and did one of the original surveys of Louisville, and then his son Alexander Scott Bullitt, he's the one that built Oxmoor and the Bullitt home. He was married several times and had various kids. Hopefully everyone's been out to Oxmoor House there, Oxmoor Farm. The Filson Historical Society just recently had a big event out there. If you're a member of the Filson, they go out there periodically. It's a beautiful house. And there's the cemetery. It is very well maintained. There's Jack Koppel. I always tell Jack he's outstanding in his field. But Jack was very proud to get into this cemetery. I was able to facilitate that, so he was great. But anyways, here, again, the Bullitt family has excellent records of where everyone is buried. Unfortunately, most of the grave sites that we can't find are children, babies, children. They are not very well buried, and they deteriorate very quickly. This was the Filson Club back in 100 years ago, March of 1922. 101 years ago, the Filson went out there to document things. Can you believe that? Wow. Some of the headstones there. William Christian, he was killed by Indians. We had a lot of unfortunate incidents like that in the late 1700s. Some of the headstones. Have no idea what that means, but it's on the back of that headstone there. It must have been a favorite saying.
Was that tennis rackets on the previous?
Yes, that person there was, did she win Wimbledon? It says a finalist with Wimbledon, yeah. Yeah, the Bullet Farm actually had tennis courts on it at one time. They still may, but I don't think they were very well kept. But they had tennis courts primarily because of her. They even have a pet cemetery there at Oxmoor, and these were all their famous doggies that they had.
Total creepiness.
The Otterburn family cemetery, it's the red square on the right, that's the Bullet Cemetery. There you can see where Coles is, there at the Waterston Expressway, and then the Otterburn family cemetery is in the yellow box there. Talks about the Otterburns. They purchased the William Christian homestead in 1830. And then they have their cemetery there. Some of the headstones. It's very well maintained. In fact, and I didn't include it in this presentation, but the Otterburns family just had a huge reunion out there at this location. They had a photograph of them all. There was like several hundred of them there. So they all are, and there's still Otterburns that still live in the area. Unfortunately, some of their Otterburns were not very more infamous than famous. Two of them were slave traders. This is a historic marker downtown. Burke's Family Cemetery. This is another very prominent cemetery here that everyone here should have seen. You may not have recognized that you're next to it, but it's there in the parking lot of Bed Bath & Beyond and Home Depot. This is the Burke's house itself. It's called Winchester Place. It's just off Breckenridge Lane. Talks about it there, who owned it.
The cemetery is actually where Red Lobster is.
Yeah.
You don't know it's there because of the bushes and trees, but it's right there in the park, by the parking lot of Red Lobster.
Here's an aerial view of it, and there's a photograph with the bushes around it. It's hiding in plain sight, it says.
Yeah. You get to it.
And you can go inside. It's unfortunate that they have it's unsecured cemetery, because vandals do go in there and unfortunately do things. There's a photograph of it. More history of the Burke's family.
I live in Winchester Place, and when I look out my living room, I'm looking at that house.
Oh, wow, great.
Yeah.
It's now owned by Vivian Sawyer, I believe.
Yes, it is.
And her husband was a good friend of mine who passed away a few years
Yes,
ago,
yes.
Tom Nolan. There's another photograph of it. The Ross Family Cemetery, it's there at, what is that, 2935 Arlington Road. They're off Tellersville Road, and where we got? We got Breckenridge Lane. This is in someone's backyard. So this is just outside St. Matthews area. But yeah, this is in someone's backyard. Talks about the Ross family. They owned a lot of that land in that area. Not in the best of shape. But still a number of headstones that are visible. Floyd Parks Cemetery, it's off of Breckenridge Lane behind the Jamestown Apartments there, Prince William Street. You can see the red location there. There are just a few headstones at that location. We think there are more people buried there, but there's not too many good records and we can't find the headstones. But Floyd Park's headstone is still there. Okay, this is probably to me, outside of Zachary Taylor's cemetery, this is probably to me one of the more famous cemeteries in this area, the Floyd Breckenridge Cemetery. Again, it's back behind Jamestown Apartments off Breckenridge Lane. You can see the location there, Jamestown and Prince William Streets. Colonel John Floyd. He was only, let me see, I thought he was 28, but the numbers there don't add up to 28. What would that be, 31, 32? So maybe he was 32 years old when he was killed by Indians. He was doing a survey. For some reason, Native Americans did not like the surveyors back then, for some reason. But he was killed by Indians at the age of 32, it says, and he was buried at this location. But John Floyd, his legacy has lived on well beyond. He was killed, how many years ago was it? It was 240 years ago. But yet we still remember him by, for instance, the parklands of Floyd's Fork, Floyd County. Anything named Floyd is usually attributed to John Floyd. So here's the cemetery. It's well defined. There is a stone wall around it. I did this genealogy chart a while back to kind of explain all the connections to John Floyd. After he was killed, he was married, his wife married a Breckenridge, and that's where Breckenridge Lane comes from. Back in the 1960s, some bureaucrat got the idea that, hey, we have a Breckenridge Street and we have a Breckenridge Lane. It's very confusing to people about that. So let's change this Breckenridge out in St. Matthews, make it with an E instead of an I, and voila. That's why you have it spelled with an E instead of an I, to differentiate the downtown street from this street out in St. Matthews. But anyways, they were connected all over the place with various things. They were connected to the Speed Art Museum, Shelby Park, their daughter, the Caldwell sisters at Cave Hill. There's a lot of history here. I won't go through it all, but John Floyd was the patriarch of all this. And then the Breckenridge Caldwell's home was there adjacent to Bowman Field off Pee Wee Reese Lane. It's where the driving range is for Seneca Golf Course. So if you're driving golf balls, you're driving it onto the front lawn of the Caldwell house here. Breckenridge Caldwell. They owned a lot of land. The Seneca Park area they all owned, the Bowman Field, Shelby Park area, they owned all that land. Some more of their things. They donated a lot of money. They helped build St. Mary and Elizabeth Hospital there in the South End, Caldwell Hall at Catholic University. I won't go into their whole history, but take one of the tours at Cave Hill, you'll hear a lot about the Caldwells and the Breckenridges. Not sure why I've got this one in here, St. Louis Cemetery. Let's see, where is that? Oh, okay. I know why I got this one in here. Kind of threw me a bit. But anyways, in St. Louis Cemetery, the Breckenridges and Caldwells are buried there. They were Catholic. And so these are their headstones. And those are all the various cemeteries we just looked at. And if you're interested in any books, you can see me later. But anyways, thanks for attending. Good deal. Okay, we kept that under 2 hours. That's good. Any questions about any of this? Yes?
You had mentioned the Filson Historical how does the Historical League work in conjunction with Filson?
Okay, well, Filson is a huge organization. They're not just based in Louisville, but they go from like Cincinnati down to Memphis. They cover the entire Ohio Valley. So they are a very large, much larger than the Louisville Historical League. We're primarily concerned with Metro Louisville, whereas the Filson is just this big, broad. In fact, when I started interacting with the Filson many years ago, they're like going, well, we're not really interested just in Louisville history. We're interested in all of this. But I'm a Filson member, and I do a number of Filson talks. But yeah, they're a huge organization. By the way, they have a lot more money than the Louisville Historical League as well. But they have a lot more members. But no, they cover a broad range of things. Yeah, they're a huge group. Yes.
I was wondering, some of these cemeteries are on private property, and I was wondering, is there any legal obligation that the owner has to either maintain it or allow access to the family, or somehow do something so that it's not torn up, or do they have no?
Yeah, for the most part, a private cemetery has really hardly any protection to it whatsoever, unless it's within the deed restrictions or anything of that nature. And unfortunately, a lot of the family descendants move on and they don't even know they had a family cemetery. Now, we come across that a lot. Of the 300 cemeteries here in Jefferson County, I would say about only 10% of them are really protected properly. Most of the cemeteries are abandoned and not very well cared for. I'll never forget Reservoir Park, which is over here off Frankfort Avenue by the water company. I got a call one day saying, hey, we have a headstone in our backyard. Do you know who this is? Okay, so I called up Jack and said, Jack, get over there and find out what's going on with this. And sure enough, it was a cemetery in someone's backyard. They had no clue what it was. Yeah, yeah, we get those calls. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yes, but you know, some of the cemeteries like Cave Hill. Now there is a law, I think now, that when people are buried, and I'm not sure if we have any funeral directors here today, but it's my understanding that when you're buried now, you have to be buried in a concrete enclosure, crypt, if you want to call it that, and properly documented, and then money has to be set aside in an endowment fund for the care of that, for that grave site. I know Cave Hill has probably the most endowment ever in the state of Kentucky for any cemetery. But yeah, there are new protections to try and identify these where people are buried now. But back in those days, they were just, buried in the backyard. Yeah.
Do you all, like you and Jack and Alan, just deal with Jefferson County? Because we have some land out in Oldham County, and right adjacent to the property line, there's a Funk, F-U-N-K, which is a real prominent name. But it hasn't been taken care of, and we were trying to...
I would contact the Oldham County Historical Society if you haven't already. They're pretty active out there. But no, I try to get Jack outside of Jefferson County. In fact, when I took him to Spencer County, he's like, well, I don't really go outside Jefferson County. But no, we stay primarily here in Jefferson County. But the historical societies around the area, like last night I went to a Floyd County Historical Society meeting over in New Albany, and they do cemeteries over there as well and watch out for the cemeteries in Floyd County, Indiana. So, each of the county historical societies pretty much maintain their own, at least try to.
We've talked to, but not to any extent. I didn't know if...
Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
We have 300 to deal with here. That's enough. Yes.
Did you come across many slave cemeteries, and if so, are they marked as such?
And again, as per what I had said, no, slave cemeteries are very difficult to find because they don't have regular headstones, they're just stones. If anyone goes out to Bernheim Forest, me and my wife are regular hikers out at Bernheim Forest, and if you go on the one trail, trying to think about, anyways, there's one of the trails that go up around the Magruder Cemetery. The Magruder family owns that land where Bernheim Forest is. They have a very nice cemetery, but just as you go on the hiking trail back around the Magruder Cemetery is the slave cemetery right around it. And a Boy Scout troop has taken over the slave cemetery. They keep it very well maintained. They have all the graves marked properly. They've done this, and they've put up a nice fence around it. So if you go out hiking at Bernheim Forest, you can go to the visitor center. They'll tell you where the Magruder Cemetery is, or the slave one. But yeah, unfortunately, and that's what we're doing more research on in our slave cemeteries. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but Jack identified 2 slave cemeteries this week where they were at. So we're trying to identify those as best we can. Yes. By the way, there was it's been 10 years now, but they were tearing down. Y'all know where the Johnny's restaurant was, or Bill Boland's restaurant? They're on Bardstown Road and Hikes Lane and all that. So we get a call out of the blue saying, they're tearing down Johnny's restaurant, and there's a log house there. We're like going, what? There's a log house there? And we had no idea that Johnny's restaurant had the original Hikes house there. It was the Hikes house. The Hikes family cemetery was just out. And I always knew the family cemetery was right outside the windows of the restaurant. As you're eating there, you look out, there's the Hikes. They're laying right there. But Jack Koppel goes, oh my God, there's got to be a slave cemetery there. So we quickly did research, and we had the excavators who were doing a lot of the demolition to go around and dig up the land in that area looking for the slave cemetery, but we could not find it. But we know there's a slave cemetery in that vicinity. Yes. Okay, well anyways, y'all been a great audience. I need to turn off my camera though. I wish I had done that earlier. Now they got all my comments.